I'm a crypto influencer. This new coin, it's about to explode a 1000xer. People just like you have listened to my advice from the BitBoy for years and been able to get 10x, 25x, even 100x, even in some rare cases, 1000x gains. If you want to know exactly how those people did it, all you have to do is stay tuned until after this message.
Millions of messages invade our screens. Their aim? To direct our choices in purchasing, voting, or adhering to an idea. They are omnipresent and shape our vision of the world. They rely on persuasion techniques invented a century ago in the United States. They were developed in less than 50 years by a small group of thinkers in order to control the masses. To impose their power, authoritarian regimes used force. Western democracies invented public relations. One of the group's leading theoreticians was Edward Bernays.
Public relations embraces what I call the engineering of consent based on Thomas Jefferson's principle that in a democratic society, everything depends on the consent of the people.
See how I got your attention if you watch that whole clip? I got you, and you owe me a like. I sold you one thing, and you're getting something totally different than you thought, but oddly, you kind of like it. That's why you're still watching. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of persuasion. The business of persuasion is advertising, and it isn't what you think that it is. Let's get it. I'm not a financial advisor. Welcome to the channel. I'm your host, the BitBoy. And today we're getting deep. If you want your political, financial, and historical IQs to increase, watch this entire video. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Advertising. It's one of the most important industries in the world, but it wasn't always that way. Advertising went through a major transformation in the early 20th century and became the mass marketing industry that we know today. 100 years ago, advertisements were pretty boring. They just showed you the product and told you about the features. There were no babes in swimsuits or sassy geckos to get people excited about the product. Nobody had really even thought about that yet. Now that I say it out loud, it does kind of seem weird that most of the commercials on TV actually have nothing to do with the products they're trying to sell. Instead, they're working to create a mental connection with their brand in your mind, usually through emotion, humor, and even, sometimes, subliminal messages. Now, this all started to change in the late 1920s when a man named Edward Bernays published a book called Propaganda. Bernays proposed using psychological manipulation tactics for both political goals and advertising and business. Using propaganda in politics was nothing new. Walter Lippmann, a founding member of the Council of the Four Horsemen, had already been writing about that for a while. And really, if you think about it, using psychological manipulation in politics and warfare can be traced back as far as Sun Tzu's Art of War. I thought Do Kwon wrote that. I was wrong. We covered Walter Lippmann in our video on the three-letter Council of the Four Horsemen. And there is an overlap between his work and the world of Edward Bernays. The major contribution that Bernays made was using this similar style of psychological warfare in business. This becomes even more interesting when you see that his uncle was Sigmund Freud. The two guys that got killed by that tiger, maybe just one of them. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. That's the guy who invented psychoanalysis. He was also a huge cokehead though, who thought that every young boy wants his mother. Everybody just needs a mommy. And that every woman is jealous of our eggplants. I don't understand it. So I would say that his nephew was probably a lot smarter than he was, but Freud still ended up being the most famous of the two. Despite his addictions and strange theories, Freud's discoveries about the human unconscious influenced his nephew's work. Bernays used what he knew about the inner workings of the mind as a tool of persuasion to control the masses through their subconscious.
Like his uncle Sigmund, Bernays was convinced that human beings were driven by irrational forces. The only way to deal with the public was to connect with their unconscious desires.
What my father understood about groups is that they are manipulable, they're malleable, and that you can tap into their deepest desires or their deepest fears and use that.
Bernays was the first person to use the term public relations to describe the work of the propagandist. In his book, Propaganda, Bernays highlighted his own work and the work of many other prominent figures in the public relations industry. The book has some really crazy quotes like this one. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of in almost every act of our daily lives, even Mr. X and the Senor. Of politics or business, in our social conduct or ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires to control the public mind. It's weird, isn't it? That's exactly what I've been telling you guys for months now. The clients that Edward Bernays had ranged from major corporations to the US president, and his job was to advise them on how to use propaganda. Betty Crocker approached him when they were having trouble selling their instant cake mix. Bernays instructed them to change the recipe by adding an egg, which would make the consumer feel that they weren't just using an instant mix, because there was a lot of pressure to cook everything from scratch back in those days, and that was bad for business. Bernays' trick, well, it worked. And the company, well, they made a fortune. I guess that takes the cake. I made that one up on the fly, guys. A short time after the success of Betty Crocker, Bernays was approached by the American Tobacco Company, who was trying to figure out how to convince women to smoke cigarettes. Apparently at the time, there was a stigma attached to women smoking because it wasn't considered to be ladylike. Bernays and the ATC, well, they wanted to change the culture around smoking and open up the tobacco market for the feminine half of the population, so they started left-handed cigarettes. No, I'm just kidding, I think that's something different. But they believed that getting this population would double their sales. Bernays exploited the women's civil rights struggle by making advertisements that claimed it was liberating and empowering for women to smoke cigarettes. In his advertisements, Bernays called cigarettes torches of freedom and encouraged young feminists to light up. Again, his deceptive marketing worked. The American Tobacco Company doubled their revenue.
While disapproving of women who smoked, men began to take up smoking in increasing numbers, partly because a flood of advertisements in what was America's newest mass medium, national magazines, made smoking attractive. These ads evoked the symbolic values many men already associated with cigarettes: sexual appeal, sophistication, pleasure. But they failed to persuade women to risk the disapproval of their menfolk by taking up cigarettes. Even George Washington Hill, the advertising genius who made Lucky Strikes America's best-selling cigarettes, couldn't figure out how to break through the social barriers that kept women from smoking. So he turned to a public relations genius, Edward Bernays.
He said, "We have a problem. We're losing half the market in America because there is a taboo against women smoking, particularly smoking in the streets." He said, "I want your help on that." So I said, before I can offer you a suggestion or a recommendation, I would like your authority to visit Dr. A.A. Brill, who was the leading psychoanalyst of his time. So I went to Dr. Brill and I said, "Can you tell me what cigarettes mean to women?" And as quick as that, he said, "Cigarettes to women are torches of freedom that they use to dramatize their objection to the taboo against smoking by men." And then he added as an afterthought, "and they titillate the erogenous zones of the lips." So I left and wondered what to do with that information. And I decided we would get debutantes to light torches of freedom in the Easter parade to protest man's inhumanity to women by the taboo against smoking. Within 6 weeks, smoking became an accepted pattern for women throughout the United States.
An ancient prejudice has been removed. Today, legally, politically, and socially, womanhood stands in her true light, American intelligence has cast aside the ancient prejudice that held her to be inferior.
He also worked for the United Fruit Company, which we've already covered in an in-depth video on corporations. You can check that one out up here. His job for them was to portray the Guatemalan government as a communist threat, which helped justify the US government to support a coup there in 1954. He was deeply involved in the government, and he shaped a lot of the media strategies that political campaigns still follow today. Bernays worked on a bunch of political campaigns and advised politicians on how to present themselves to the public. He worked with President Calvin Coolidge, who had a reputation for being boring and serious. Bernays organized a breakfast for famous actors that was basically a staged media event to make the president look more cool and hip. Maybe if he was still around today, he'd be able to convince people that Biden was still alive and not the actual crypt keeper. In all seriousness, the type of showmanship that Bernays introduced to political campaigns is still alive today. I'm sure there was a PR consultant that told Biden it would make him seem younger if he told reporters how hot and steamy things were with his wife. Both sides play this game too. The Trump campaign used firms like Cambridge Analytica to mine data about people and serve them advertisements and content specifically designed to appeal to their taste and their personality. Most of the campaign theatrics and photo ops that are a regular part of our politics now have taken a lot of inspiration from the work of Bernays. This is obviously still alive and well in business today too. Every commercial you see is more about appealing to your emotions and informing. PR agencies are also hired by some of the worst companies to cover up the damage that they're doing to society. PR firms played a major role in continuing covering up the opiate crisis. Two of the top PR companies in the world, Edelman and Burson Marsteller, helped Purdue Pharma cover up the dangers of OxyContin for years. Richard Edelman, he's a member of the Atlantic Council, an influential think tank that we've covered in another video. Boop. See how all this is fitting together? Purdue Pharma hired PR firms like Edelman and Burson Marsteller to manage its public image and promote OxyContin as a safe and effective painkiller. It'll kill you, but you won't have any pain. These firms helped craft messages that downplayed the addiction risks and promoted the drug to doctors and the public. The PR campaigns included aggressive marketing strategies, sponsored research, and educational programs that positioned OxyContin as safe, just like cigarettes, and anyone who got addicted as drug fiends. It wasn't just them. Any company that was selling opiates had a PR agency on retainer. Johnson & Johnson hired the Hill and Knowlton firm to push back against a growing public opinion that their drugs were dangerous. It was more than just advertisements. PR firms also coordinated with lobbyists to influence politicians and regulatory agencies. They're also famous for planting stories in the news to direct people's opinion. Look that way. PR firm called the Rennan Group was paid over $56 million by the US government to promote the war in Iraq while Baby Bush was in the office. This was years after the PR firm Hill and Knowlton was used to drum up support for the first Iraq war. We're all definitely really glad we supported that thing. I tell you what, when old Papa Bush was in the office way back in the 90s, and this one was crazy too. The Kuwaiti government paid the firm over $10 million to get the US involved in the war, which was localized at the time. The firm coached a 15-year-old girl to testify at a human rights hearing that she saw Iraqi soldiers taking the lives of babies after ripping them from their incubators in a hospital. It was later discovered that she made the whole thing up, and she was also the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, Saud Nasir al-Sabah, who had a major conflict of interest in the situation. This was one of the major stories that helped create support for the war back home. And once it was proven to be false, it was too late. Nobody knew. I'm sure we're still seeing this stuff take place every day. In many of the major news stories, we just don't have the proof yet, but just give it time. News turns to propaganda before you know it. That's all I got. Be blessed. Big boy out.